Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Congratulations to Aiden Hutchinson for finishing second in the Heisman race. I would have been absolutely shocked if his name was called as the winner. As we all know, it's pretty much a quarterback, running back, or wide receiver that hauls in that hardware. To be a defensive lineman and finish second is absolutely amazing. So again, congratulations, Aiden Hutchinson, on a great season. Jim Harbaugh and his team will get back on the practice field next week and begin preparations for the Orange Bowl matchup with Georgia. We'll have more coverage starting then. This week, full attention is being given to National Signing Day on Wednesday. We have 20 verbals as of right now. We did have 3 more high-level visits to campus over the weekend, so the numbers could change on Wednesday. My guest today says this class might not be great, but it is filled with some very elite players and many others that have a high ceiling. Joining me this week on our Game Day segment is recruiting editor EJ Holland from the Wolverine. Just a heads up, EJ was driving as we recorded this morning, so the audio quality is sketchy at times, and we apologize. EJ is up next though, so stay with us. Here with us on the show today is recruiting editor EJ Holland from the Wolverine. EJ, it's been a while, but this is a huge week, so it's great to have you with us.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Really a big week for all of college football with the signing day on Wednesday, with the early signing day, which has now become the big signing day. Before we touch on all of that coming up, though, let's talk for a minute about the Heisman presentation on Saturday night. Aiden Hutchinson didn't win it, but finishing second as a defensive lineman, what a great honor that was, EJ.
Yeah, no, definitely. He's had a tremendous season. I think you'll see the impact of what he's been able to do as an edge rusher transition over to the recruiting side. Guys being able to see what Aiden's done in this defensive scheme under Mike McDonald, I think will pay dividends on the recruiting trail next cycle. But obviously Aiden, a terrific player and Michigan man.
This past weekend, Michigan had several uncommitted kids in for visits. Defensive lineman Derek Moore, he's a 4-star. Darius Clemens, 4-star wideout. Alex Orji, a 3-star quarterback. I would think taking a visit this close to the signing day is a good thing for Michigan. Do they have a shot at any of those players?
Yeah, anytime you get guys on campus before the dead period, which started last night at midnight, anytime you get guys on campus right before National Signing Day, I think it's really a positive sign. That's the last time these kids get face-to-face contact with college coaches. Of course, the dead period doesn't mean that you can't talk to kids over the phone. It just means that you can't see them face to face. So Michigan got the last say with all of those kids. I think they're trending in the right direction for Derek Moore. They're trying to figure out the NCAA rule, which states that if you have a former high school coach on staff, which they do with Biff Poggi, I feel like it states that if a former high school coach is on staff in an off-the-field role, so not like Ron Bellamy, who's obviously on the field, but in an off-the-field role, you can't recruit at that school. St. Francis is where Biff was. You can't recruit at that school for 2 years. Obviously, Derek Moore is there now. He played under Biff. So Michigan's trying to figure out that situation. Guys have been able to get waivers in the past. So I think if Michigan is able to get around that rule or at least figure out a way to mess with that rule, they can get Derek Moore on board, and that would be a nice late land. Moore, big athletic prospect that can add some weight and play a 3-tech or can be a stand-up edge rusher. He's a little bit of a tweener, but he's a tremendous talent, top 150 prospect nationally. a guy that was a former Oklahoma commit. So, again, would be a great steal late. Darius Clemens, this is a guy that didn't even have Michigan in his top schools list, but the Wolverines quietly continued to work on him throughout the cycle. He's originally from Michigan, actually from Lansing, played youth football with Andra Anthony, and those families know each other really, really well, which kind of helped Michigan get back in the mix along with a great season. Michigan has a need at wide receiver this cycle. Right now, the only wide receiver commit is Tyler Morris, who's coming off a torn ACL. So obviously they want to add one or two more before the end of cycle, and Clemens is definitely a guy that's really, really high on the board, and I'm interested to talk to him and his dad later tonight and just kind of see how the visit went. But really positive vibes from everything I've been hearing. I think Michigan's main competition is Auburn, but you look at the stability at Michigan now with Jim Harbaugh, the family ties to the state, the family ties to Andrade. I think that really helps out a lot. And then Alex Orji is just a really interesting prospect. He's actually from Rockwall, Texas, a suburb of Dallas, which is where I lived before I made the move out here to the Midwest. So I lived down the street from the Orji family. I covered both of his older brothers who play at Vanderbilt. Alex, a really smart kid, talented athlete. And that's what I would kind of classify him as, more of an athlete take, or a quarterback with athlete upside in the sense that he can move around and play multiple positions. Both of his brothers play linebacker. He could easily grow into that, or an edge rusher. He's a big, athletic kid. Could end up being a hybrid defensive back at the next level, has experience playing wide receiver. So a lot of position flexibility as a pure quarterback. His great arm strength. He needs to improve his mechanics and accuracy, but he's a playmaker. He has great legs. He can make plays on the move. He can throw on the run really well. Obviously, pick up a ton of first downs and make big plays using his feet. But I think with Orji, that position flexibility affords you room to take him as more of an athlete type. So I think all three of these guys that were on campus this weekend could end up being in the class. We'll just kind of have to wait and see what kind of buzz we hear today. Guys were on campus until late last night. I actually texted Orji's father, Willie, and they were still on campus, and it was like 6 p.m. Central, so 7 p.m. Eastern, and they were still on campus. So those visits went long this weekend, so we'll see what kind of comes out of everything today.
Well, until we hear from those three or any others, we now have 20 verbals in this class. So let's start on the defensive side and talk about some of them. 5 defensive backs: Zeke Berry, Damani Dent, Miles Pollard, Cody Jones, and the big prize of the group, of course, Will Johnson from Grosse Pointe. Your thoughts on this group?
Yeah, it's a great group with room to add more talent. Michigan's still in the mix with Keon Saab and is arguably the leader in that recruitment. Former Clemson commit who visited for the game against Ohio State. If you add Saab, I mean, that's a whale of a land in the secondary with those 6. They could even take up to 7. Cohen Entringer, who is at Walls Lake Western, is an in-state riser who would be more of an athlete take that can play in the secondary. So honestly, that group might even grow even more. There really is a potential for 7 defensive back takes. But, I mean, starting off with Will, obviously he's the crown jewel of the class. I think he's everything you want in a tall, long, physical corner. The knock on Will has always been not having verified speed, but Will makes up for that with, like I said, his length, his physicality, his technique, his football IQ, his instincts. He's been watching Michigan since he was a kid. He's been training at defensive back since he was, old enough to walk. He's the son of former Wolverine Deion Johnson, who has trained him since birth to be an elite level defensive back. And Will has been on my radar since he was a freshman when I was actually on the Texas beat. Saw him out at a 7-on-7 tournament, and even then you could see the elite skill set. At the time, like I said, I was covering the Longhorns, so I had no reason to really look at guys in the Midwest just because Texas doesn't have any type of footprint here. But Will immediately popped off the screen for me. I was like, who's this kid from Detroit? He's going to be, a 5-star level talent, and obviously he's grown into that. So really love Will and just kind of everything he brings to the table. He played a lot of safety this year. He can play safety early on in his career. He can play nickel. He's so smart. He's so instinctual. He's so technically sound that I think you can move him around, especially early. But even though the knock has been the verified times, I feel like he's a guy that is fast enough. I mean, he led his Grosse Pointe South team to the state track meet in the relay. He works with a private speed trainer. You pop on the game film and you see the game speed. So I'm not too worried. He actually moves really well for being a really tall corner at about 6'2 3/4, 6'3". And he's added some really good weight. I think he's up at about 195, 200 pounds right now, and it's, solid muscle. And I think Ben Herbert will continue to fill him out. So I think the sky's the limit with Will. He'll be an early contributor. He's enrolling early, so I expect him to make an impact as a true freshman. And then really quickly on some of the other guys, I think Miles Pollard also fits that mold of a tall, long corner at about 6'2", 180. He definitely needs to add some more weight, especially in his lower half, which is something that he's continually working on. Like Will, he has really good technique. Miles has really come a long way over the last year. I think he's improved so much just as a pure cover corner. He's really, really physical. You turn on the game film, you see him in person, and he loves to smack people. Teammate of Michigan freshman linebacker Junior Colson. If he's anything like Junior, obviously Michigan fans will be very, very happy. I think with Miles, it's about adding the proper weight and then making sure his speed is up to par as well. Looking at Damani Dent, I think he's more of a project take with a lot of upside. I think he has a lot of Rod Moore type traits. That's kind of what Michigan saw in Damani Dent. But with him, I think he's more of a little bit of a boom or bust prospect. Cody Jones is a really athletic guy that can kind of play anywhere in the secondary. Michigan recruited him as more of a nickel guy that can play some corner, that can play some safety, that can just move around. He was a guy that played a lot of running back early on in his career, so just really athletic, fast guy that just does everything well. He's not spectacular at any one thing, but he checks all the boxes in a lot of areas. Zeke Berry's a guy that I absolutely love. I don't think there's anybody I would grade higher than Zeke Berry in this Michigan class other than Will Johnson. I've been out to San Francisco to see him a couple of times. He plays at National Powerhouse De La Salle. The ceiling is so high with Zeke. He's a guy that has gotten all the great coaching out in the Bay Area, all the trainers. He has everything going for him in that regard. He's, again, elite from a technical standpoint. Like I said with Will, just really high football IQ, great instincts. He's a guy that even provides a little more flexibility than Will in terms of just having the build to play all over the secondary. So he's about 6 foot 190, which gives you a lot of leeway with him. Michigan recruited him for the Dax Hill role, and I think he'll fill that nicely. Zeke loves to come up in the box and play against the run. His closing speed is tremendous. I think he's an absolute it's just a hell of a land for Michigan. So, yeah, again, I mean, you add Keon Saab to that group, who's a bigger box safety type. I think you have one hell of a land here in the secondary.
Well, 2 defensive ends on the list, and we talked about the future impact of Aiden Hutchinson on the class of 2023. But right now, Ethan Burke out of Texas, Cavante Henry out of California. What do you like about these two guys?
Yeah, definitely. Starting off with Ethan Burke, he's a guy that just pops out of nowhere, really. He plays at Texas powerhouse Austin Westlake, really national powerhouse Austin Westlake, which produces a ton of NFL talent, including, future Hall of Famer Drew Brees. So he actually plays under a legendary high school coach there in Todd Dodge. He's gotten great coaching. He's more technically sound than you would think for not being a full-time football guy. He was actually committed to Maryland for lacrosse, but he's a really intriguing athlete at about 6'7", 230 pounds. He was, again, a really high-profile lacrosse player. He actually reminds me of a guy I covered, way back when at SMU in Margus Hunt, who turned into a second-round draft pick. He was a guy that didn't really play football, but was an All-American track and field athlete and got the proper coaching and developed into an NFL guy. I think Ethan Burke shares a lot of the same traits that I saw in Margus Hunt. And I think with the right development, he can develop into a high-level draft pick as well. I think, you're seeing the development, you saw the development with Aiden Hutchinson under Mike McDonald and some of the other defensive staff members. I think you're going to see the same thing with Ethan Burke. He might not be an immediate impact guy, but I think the sky's the limit for Burke. He has one of the biggest upsides in the class. And then you go over to Cavante Henry, and he has arguably the biggest upside in the class. He's a guy that just plays with reckless abandon coming off the edge. He doesn't really know what he's doing much yet. He needs a lot of work in the weight room, needs a lot of work from a technical and development standpoint. But, man, he just fly off the edge and get after the quarterback. The thing with Cavante Henry is Michigan going to keep him in the class? He took a visit to Washington over the weekend. His primary recruiter was actually Director of Player Personnel Courtney Morgan, who obviously bolted to Washington recently. So that's something we're really monitoring heading into National Signing Day.
Well, 4 linebackers verbaled in this group. Jimmy Rolder from Chicago, Deuce Spurlock from Alabama, from Huntsville, Michael Pollard from Florida, Aaron Alexander, a local kid from Belleville High. That is a position group, though, we need to add depth at, isn't it, EJ?
Yeah, I mean, you look at this linebacker group, and linebacker cycle was just a whirlwind. I mean, Michigan had a lot of misses here. There's no really great way to put that. There were a lot of weird recruitments. It was just kind of an odd cycle for recruiting linebackers. Obviously, George Hilo and Mike McDonald were new. Mike McDonald hasn't had a lot of recruiting experience under his belt. Hilo started off as the safeties coach, as you might remember. So just a lot of transition and just, a lot of interesting recruitment that didn't turn out in Michigan's favor. But at the end of the day, I think they landed some really good prospects here. We'll start off with Michael Pollard just because he's a guy that can actually be considered more of an edge. He's was primarily recruited as an edge, but with a guy that has more traditional linebacker flexibility. He's pretty skinny right now at about 210 pounds. But again, he has a lot of room to fill out, and he is a little bit of a tweener in the sense that he can play multiple roles in this scheme. He's a guy that Hilo, who has strong Jacksonville ties, being a Jacksonville native, really, really liked it on film. He plays for a great program out there in Bartram Trail. So I'm interested to see how Michael Pollard develops. He's not a guy that we've talked a lot about. He's just quiet by nature. He's, not necessarily an exciting prospect, but I think he's a guy that can open some eyes. He's the nephew of former Michigan great Braylon Edwards, so I think he kind of has that maize and blue blood in him. Looking at some of the other guys, I think Deuce Spurlock is very undervalued. He reminds me of Junior Colson in his playing style. I don't think he's up to the Junior Colson level. I had Junior Colson as a 5-star level prospect. I would grade Deuce Spurlock as more of a low 4-star, maybe high 3-star type player, but he plays with a lot of similarities in the sense that he's really athletic in the middle. He's built really, really well at 6'2", 225 pounds, moves sideline to sideline well, has experience playing, more of an H-back role, just a playmaker on the offensive side of the ball. A lot of people forget Junior was a running back as well and returned kicks. So I think Spurlock brings kind of that similar athletic ability. Again, not quite Junior Colson level, but kind of around that same vicinity. And I think he's a guy that can really move the needle and surprise a lot of people as well. Aaron Alexander was recruited kind of for the same type of position, more of an inside linebacker role. I think he's more of a project type than Deuce. He kind of came along late this season, just great speed. Michigan took him off his camp performance. I mean, he ran a blazing 4.40. I think Mike McDonald saw his athletic ability, saw his 40 time, and said, hey, this is a guy that we can mold and turn into something. He's an in-state kid. He's a winner. Helped lead Belleville to its first state championship this fall. He's a high GPA kid. He's smart. He grew up a Michigan fan. His dream was to sign with Michigan, so he's a guy that bleeds maize and blue and wants to be at Michigan. Another guy that could exceed his ranking. And then Jimmy Rolder was just a great find by Michigan late. I mean, Michigan wasn't the first to jump in on him, but they were relatively early on Jimmy, who didn't see his recruitment rise until the fall. He's a guy that didn't really start playing linebacker full time until the spring. He was an Illinois baseball commit, but I love guys that have the baseball profile that, it just transitions over so well to the football field. He's built really well at about 6'2.5", 6'3", 225 pounds, just looks like your typical Big Ten inside linebacker. I think Jimmy, with his build, with his IQ, and with his mental capacity, he'll be able to make an impact almost right away at Michigan. I mean, Michigan's not really short on linebackers, but I think Jimmy's a guy that they can really utilize. So you have to remember, Jimmy picked Michigan over Ohio State. He had some high-profile offers there down the stretch. I think he was a great steal for Michigan. And at the end of the day, like I said, it was kind of a weird cycle, but you end up with Jimmy Rolder, and that's a win.
Well, only 2 defensive tackles are committing this cycle. Kenneth Grant out of Indiana, Mason Graham out of California. Your thoughts on these 2 kids?
Yeah, I think, starting off with Kenneth Grant, I mean, he's a prospect that I've been banging the drum on for a long time. I went out to Merrillville, which is in the Gary area, and I saw him for the first time in the spring right after Michigan offered him, and I just fell in love with him there. I mean, it's not often you get 6'5", 340-pound defensive tackles that can move the way he does. I mean, you turn on the tape, you look at his senior highlights, the spin move, the swing move, just the feet. He's like a dancing bear out there. I know that term's usually used to describe offensive linemen, but that's really what he is. He's so nimble and quick on his feet. He's so athletic for being 6'5", 340 pounds. He actually doesn't have a ton of bad weight on him. For this defensive scheme, I think he's going to be an immediate impact as a nose. So I love Kenneth Grant. I think he's one of the best lands of the cycle. And it's kind of the same thing with Mason Graham. I feel like he's one of the better lands of the cycle. He's severely underrated. He was extremely productive in the Trinity League in Southern California, which is arguably the best high school football league in America. And he made big play after big play against teams like St. John Bosco and Mater Dei. I think he's a prospect that's also going to exceed his ranking. He might not have the upside of some of the other guys, which I think is a knock on him, that he's already reached his peak and, all that jazz. But I feel like with Mason, what he is right now is really, really damn good. I mean, he's everything you want in a 3 technique. He gets after the quarterback. He plays with elite technique. He's just a playmaker. I think he'll make an early impact along the defensive line. And Michigan's still working to add another one this cycle in Deion Walker, mammoth 360-pounder out of Detroit Cass Tech, who's down to Kentucky and Michigan. We'll see how things kind of progress with him as we head into the early signing period.
Over on the offensive side, 2 tight ends set to commit. Colston Loveland from Idaho, Marlon Klein from Georgia. What can you tell us about these 2 big guys, EJ?
Yeah, I love Colston Loveland. He's kind of a hidden gem out in Idaho, which, a lot of people don't get out to, but I had a chance to go watch him play live, and he's just a big, strong kid that has played a lot of more of a Y role or just split out wide in general. He's a great receiving tight end, but he also played a lot of an H-back role, an inline role this year. He's really progressed as a blocker as well. I think he's just so impressive in the weight room. You look at some of his weight room numbers, and they're really high up there for high school level guys, especially a guy that's out in Idaho, where you think he might be more raw, that, they don't have the best facilities and football's not the focus. That's not necessarily the case with Loveland. I mean, he's a gym rat. He's really progressed a lot in the weight room. So I think he's a guy that can make an early impact as well. Obviously, Michigan has some tight ends on the roster, but I do think that Loveland's a candidate to play early. You look at Marlon Klein, and he's one of the more intriguing lands this cycle. He's a guy that's from Germany, transferred over to Georgia to pursue his dream of playing college football, and really grew into great D1 level prospect. I think Jay Harbaugh does a really nice job of identifying tight end talent, and I think they have two guys that have tremendous upside, that are tremendous pass catchers, that have become more willing blockers as seniors, that can add weight and be great all-around tight ends, or at the very least be great split tight ends. But I think Michigan's getting two high-level prospects in Marlon Klein and Colson Loveland. I think Michigan fans should be excited.
Well, one offensive lineman in this year's class, it's Connor Jones out of Colorado. Is it a concern we're only bringing in one offensive lineman this cycle?
Well, they actually have two this cycle, Connor Jones and Alessandro Lorenzetti, which is still a small group, but you look at Connor Jones, and he's an athletic tackle with a lot of upside. He kind of brings that Colorado box state mentality, which is just grind. He is the definition of a gym rat. If you look at his social media profile, it's always him just in the gym. He works consistently with former NFL offensive lineman Mac McChesney, who's one of the best offensive line trainers in the country. So I think with Connor, you turn on the film, and I know some Michigan fans have had some question marks with him, but I went out and I saw him live, and I mean, he just serves up so many pancakes. He is playing against inferior competition, but he plays with that road grader mentality. He's physical. He likes to bury people. He finishes blocks. Which is great to see as a high school offensive lineman. And then you look at his frame. I mean, he's 6'7" or 6'6", 280 pounds. He's a true tackle. Offensive lineman, that's the position that, has the lowest hit rate on. So I think he's a guy that Ed Warner, Michigan's former offensive line coach, who can say what you want about Coach Warner, but he did a tremendous job of evaluating guys. And he identified Jones really early on, and then Sharon Moore has come in and has done a terrific job with the offensive line at Michigan this cycle, and he pressed to keep Connor Jones in this class. So the Michigan staff loves Connor Jones. I like Connor Jones, especially after seeing him live a couple of times throughout the course of this cycle. I think he's another undervalued guy. He's going to come in, he's going to bust his ass, and he's going to be a guy that's going to really surprise a lot of people. And he grew up a Michigan fan. His father's originally from the Midwest, so he bleeds maize and blue too. He wants to be at Michigan. He wants to be part of the turnaround that's currently happening. And so I'm really excited about Connor Jones. You look at Alessandro Lorenzetti, and he's a guy that could be more of a right tackle or an interior offensive lineman. He's a prospect that not a lot of people really, talk about just because he's more of a boarding school kid that transferred in from Canada. He dealt with a shoulder injury this year, so I didn't, unfortunately, get a chance to see him live, but he really impressed Michigan at camp this summer, and I've heard a lot of good things about Lorenzetti. I think eventually he'll likely transition inside, so you have more of a pure tackle in Jones, more of a flex guy in Lorenzetti, and then Michigan's going to continue to work on five-star tackle Josh Connolly, who's waiting to sign until the late period. So to answer your question, is it a concern? Look, Michigan's recruited well along the offensive line over the past couple of cycles. I think you'll see a really big class in 2023 along the offensive line with a ton of talented prospects. That Michigan is in on some really, really great offensive line prospects in 2023. So I'm not too concerned about it. On top of that, you're adding Virginia transfer Andrew Gentry, who just committed last week. And I was really, really high on Gentry, who's coming off a mission trip. He'll need some time to develop his body and get everything back to normal from his mission trip. But I had him graded as a top 100 prospect. So great steal for Michigan and Andrew Gentry. I think, he's a guy that is not your standard commit this cycle, but man, he is everything that you want in a Michigan offensive lineman. So I really think the Andrew Gentry land here as more of a transfer type guy makes up for the lack of numbers this cycle.
Well, this cycle we missed on several quarterbacks early, but finally got a verbal from Jaden Denigal out of California. What style of a quarterback is he, EJ, and what led Michigan to him?
Yeah, with Denigal, I think you hit the nail on the head. Michigan just missed on some of its primary targets early in the cycle. It was tough to bring in a guy after J.J. McCarthy, who came in with that five-star billing, and then you look behind him, or, if you're a 2022 quarterback and you're looking ahead of you, you have Cade McNamara, who still has a lot of eligibility. You have JJ, who just signed. You look behind you in 2023, and you have potential land in Dante Moore. Michigan is putting all its eggs in the Dante Moore basket, and if Michigan can land Dante Moore, I mean, it's not the most appealing situation for a quarterback. So I feel like that led to kind of some of the struggles. Matt Weiss came over from the Ravens and didn't have a whole lot of experience recruiting quarterbacks, so it was kind of a weird cycle in terms of quarterback recruiting. They eventually landed on Jaden Denegal through a couple of different connections. He's not necessarily a dual threat quarterback, but he can make plays with his legs. He's a big guy at about 6'4", 220 pounds. He has a big arm that put up some impressive stats as a senior, albeit against some inferior competition out in the Mojave Desert. He's actually nowhere near L.A., as some people might assume, he's a Southern California guy. He's actually out by the Mojave Desert in the middle of nowhere. So he doesn't play against the best competition. Going out and watching him live, he still needs some work on his throwing motion. He does work with private quarterback trainer Danny Hernandez, who's one of the best quarterback trainers in the country. So I think that'll continue to help him grow. Hernandez actually trained Heisman winner Bryce Young. So, again, I think he's getting that mechanical work. He does have the arm strength, but still a bit of accuracy and touch issues. I think that he's a guy that, kind of fills the bridge between JJ and Dante. If Michigan is lucky enough to land Dante, maybe I would set, the bar for Denegal as more of a late-year career starter that can contribute in the quarterback room in different ways. But I think all eyes are definitely on 2023 and Michigan's pursuit of all-world quarterback Dante Moore.
One position group we seem to be well stocked at right now is running back. So maybe no surprise there's just one verbal in this class. It's CJ Stokes out of Columbia, South Carolina. And he's not a very big guy, is he?
No, I mean, CJ's a big guy in the sense that he's a really stocky build, kind of a little bit like Javier Dunlap last cycle, who has gotten really limited carries. But if you have had a chance to see him in his limited action, you can tell he's kind of a bigger, stocky type build, but not necessarily height-wise. And that's what same thing with CJ. I think his weight has been listed all over the place, but he's over 200 pounds at about, 5'9.5", 5'10". I think Mike Hart really took a liking to him because he kind of reminded him of himself a little bit. He doesn't really excite you a whole lot when you watch him on film, but he had a really good senior season. He doesn't play against really great competition in his league in South Carolina, but he's a guy when you look at the film, and he can do a lot of different things. He can be a 3-down back. He can catch a lot of passes out of the backfield. He can be your standard between the tackles ball carrier. I think with CJ, he's a really good complement to what Michigan already has in the running back room with Blake Corum, and then especially, as Blake will leave and Donovan becomes that primary back, I think he's a guy that can complement Donovan really well. And Mike Hart has been known as a really good running back evaluator. So while I personally am not super high on CJ Stokes, I think you take him at face value and you say, hey, this is a guy that's going to complement Donovan Edwards really well. This is a guy that Mike Hart really likes, who's really good at evaluating running backs and could surprise some people. But I think 2023 will likely see maybe two running backs. The problem with running back nationally is it's just been so down. This cycle was a down year nationally at running back. This coming cycle doesn't appear to be an amazing year at running back nationally. So it'll be interesting to see what Michigan does at the position moving forward. And I think more than ever, it's going to be really up to Mike Hart to make these great evaluations.
Well, there was a story late last week that quarterback J.D. Johnson from Pinnacle in Arizona was coming out of medical retirement, which sort of caught me by surprise, and he's entering the portal. And he was a darn good quarterback behind Spencer Rattler at Pinnacle. If he's been medically cleared to play and he's on scholarship, I wonder why he's not staying here. Have you heard anything about that, EJ?
I think he just looks at the quarterback room. It's kind of the same thing that I just touched on when talking about Michigan's pursuit of quarterbacks. I mean, you look at Cade, I mean, he has a lot of eligibility left. You look at JJ, I mean, he's supposed to be the future face of the franchise, I guess. And then you look at Dante Moore in 2023, who, again, is not a commit, but Michigan is making him the only guy on the board in 2023. And if Dante does end up signing with Michigan, I mean, there isn't much wiggle room. I really like JD as a prospect. When I went out and saw him live during my first couple of months on the Michigan beat, but I don't see a lot of wiggle room for him moving up the depth chart if JJ and Cade are going to be, both there long term, and with the potential addition of Dante Moore, I think that JD wants an opportunity to actually play, especially with how much he's had to overcome with his condition and the health issues and being told he's not going to play football. I think he just wants a chance to actually play and to have a chance to really either climb a depth chart or go into a situation where he can compete to be the starter, and I don't think that's necessarily the case at Michigan.
So all things considered, and we might see some surprises between now and signing day, would you say this is a pretty darn good class?
Yeah, I mean, one guy we didn't hit on here, Michigan only has one wide receiver commit, but that's Tyler Morris. I mean, he's coming off a torn ACL, but he's still a top 100 level type of guy. I mean, he was rated top 100 by all the major recruiting services before the injury. He's going to get on campus early. Rehab's going ahead of schedule. I think he's a guy that can surprise. You have a 5-star defensive back in Will Johnson, another potential 5-star defensive back in Zeke Berry, and then maybe even another potential 5-star defensive back in Keon Saab if Michigan is able to earn his signature. I mean, like I mentioned, Kenneth Grant is a guy that I really love, as a nose tackle. And then you have some really intriguing pieces that have the potential to be high-level guys: Mason Graham, Jimmy Rolder, Cody Jones, Miles Pollard, Colston Loveland, and Marlon Klein, etc. I mean, we just talked about all these guys. So, yeah, I don't think it's like this amazing, spectacular class, but I think there's some top-heavy talent with Zeke, with Will, with the potential of Keon, with Tyler Morris. And then I think there's some really, really nice pieces to go along with that. I mean, Michigan is really, to use Jim Harbaugh's phrase, betting on itself with evaluations. They didn't settle for more safer takes that had higher ceilings. For this class was, let's take some higher, not higher floor guys. Let's take some higher ceiling guys. And so I think that was more of the common theme with this class. And I think they're trusting their evaluations. They're trusting the ability to develop guys that they can maximize.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see on Wednesday. It sure looks like a pretty darn good class, all things considered. So then we get ready for the 2023 cycle, which is well underway right now, but in earnest after the holidays. So with us today has been recruiting writer EJ Holland from the Wolverine. EJ, as always, great to have you on the show. And after the new year, we look forward to getting you back and starting on the next cycle.
Yeah, definitely. No, I appreciate you for having me. Looking forward to National Signing Day on Wednesday. If you're not a subscriber, you can subscribe now for just $1 for 1 year promo code. If you just go over to thewolverine.com now over at On3. You can sign up and get 1 year for $1, which is, a heck of a deal. I paid like $6 for my coffee this morning, so you can get 6 subscriptions for the price of that.
We look forward to getting you back on here after the new year.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Thanks, Mike.
On Quick Hits today, as I mentioned at the top of the show, Jim Harbaugh and his team will begin Orange Bowl preparations next week. Many of you have been messaging me asking why we haven't had more basketball coverage on this month. We will have plenty of Michigan hoops and hockey coverage beginning in January, and I think we all agree, with Michigan being in the playoffs for the first time, we need to focus on that. If things go our way, and that's going to be after the playoffs in mid-January, we will have plenty of Michigan basketball coverage for you. Hoops is struggling right now with a 6-4 start, so hopefully they will be getting it together by then. Next week, we're going to learn more about our playoff opponent, the Georgia Bulldogs. I know most of us have read about them or even seen one or two of their games this year, or maybe just highlights. But next week we'll get the inside scoop from someone who has covered them all year. Georgia beat writer Mark Weiser from the Athens Banner-Herald will be our guest. That will do it for this week. Thanks again to recruiting writer EJ Holland from the Wolverine for joining us. Let's hope all of our verbals sign on the dotted line Wednesday, and who knows, there may be a few surprise additions. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Thanks for joining us, and make sure you tell your friends and family about the show. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!